They didn't just call me a failure at my brother's promotion ceremony. My father actually told the commanding officer that I was the disappointment of the family who couldn't make it in the real military. My mother nodded while my brother Marcus stood there in his Navy lieutenant uniform, embarrassed to be related to someone who had washed out of basic training. I sat in the back row wearing a simple black dress, the same woman who had led classified operations across 3 continents, and they treated me like I was their shameful secret. But what they didn't know was that when Marcus's pilot saw me after the ceremony, he would snap to attention and say the words that would shatter their reality forever. It wasn't just the words that devastated me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was the public humiliation in front of Marcus's entire unit, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone discussing damaged merchandise. The entire promotion ceremony had been a celebration of everything I supposedly wasn't: successful, accomplished, worthy of the family name. Every time someone congratulated our parents on Marcus's achievement, they would beam with pride, while subtly positioning themselves to block me from view, as if acknowledging my presence might somehow diminish his moment. I sat in that base auditorium, watching families pose for pictures with their newly promoted officers, and felt like a ghost haunting someone else's success story. My simple black dress, the same one I wore to Pentagon briefings that my family knew nothing about, suddenly felt inadequate next to my mother's designer suit and Marcus's crisp navy whites. They saw failure. They saw their daughter who couldn't hack it in the military, who had embarrassed the family by washing out during what they believed was basic training. But here's what they didn't know: what I was legally forbidden to tell them due to security clearances that went beyond top secret. While they were planning Marcus's celebration dinner at the Officers Club, I had been coordinating joint operations between 3 branches of the military across 2 time zones. While my family was shopping for the perfect outfit to celebrate their real military success, I had been briefing Joint Chiefs of Staff on strategic operations that would never appear in any public record. The irony was suffocating. My father, a retired Army captain who treated his 20-year service record like it was Patton's legacy, was lecturing me about military failure. My mother, whose greatest connection to the armed forces was her membership in the Officers' Wives Club, was nodding along like she understood military excellence. And Marcus, fresh out of Naval Academy with his shiny new lieutenant bars, was being hailed as the family's military prodigy, while I, the woman who had been personally briefed by the Secretary of Defense just last month, was told to sit in the back row to avoid embarrassing questions. The washout story they loved telling conveniently ignored that I had completed the most classified training programs in military history. It ignored that my basic training failure was actually a cover story for immediate recruitment into Air Force Special Operations. It ignored the fact that my real military record was so classified that even Marcus's commanding officer didn't have clearance to know what I actually did for the country. They didn't see any of that. Just their broken daughter who couldn't measure up to her brother's conventional success. As the ceremony concluded and families gathered for photos, my father's voice carried across the room. "We're so proud that at least one of our children could serve with distinction." It was his way of making sure everyone understood the contrast between Marcus's achievement and my supposed failure. I watched Marcus accept congratulations, his smile confident and deserving, completely unaware that his failed sister outranked every officer in that room. The truth was too dangerous for their simple narrative. It was easier to have a hero and a disappointment than to acknowledge that their understanding of military service was embarrassingly superficial. So I smiled, applauded my brother's promotion, and carried their shame like classified information I could never declassify. What they couldn't possibly imagine was that in less than 10 minutes, when Marcus's pilot caught sight of me, the carefully constructed lie about my military career would detonate like an IED in the middle of their perfect family celebration. But that revelation was still moments away, and for now I was just the family failure hiding in the shadows of someone else's success. For 12 years, I'd been living a double life that made witness protection look simple. While my family believed I was a military washout working some vague government desk job, I'd been quietly climbing the ranks of the most classified operations in Air Force history, reaching positions that most career officers never even knew existed. It started the day I supposedly failed basic training at Lackland Air Force Base. What my family saw as humiliating dismissal was actually immediate recruitment into Air Force Special Operations Command's most classified program. My background in strategic intelligence and my fluency in Mandarin, Arabic, and Russian had caught the attention of officers whose names didn't appear on any organizational chart. Within 6 months, I wasn't just another trainee struggling through obstacle courses. I was leading intelligence operations in regions so sensitive that their existence was denied by 3 governments. My official military record showed a brief, unsuccessful stint in basic training followed by an honorable discharge for failure to meet physical standards. My actual record was buried in files that required presidential authorization to access. The work was invisible, dangerous, and absolutely critical to national security. I'd spent 18 months in the South China Sea, coordinating intelligence operations between Navy SEALs, Marine Force Recon, and Air Force pararescue teams. I'd managed counter-terrorism operations in North Africa that prevented attacks on American soil. I'd briefed CIA directors on operational security for missions that would never be acknowledged publicly. But the real breakthrough came during Operation Silent Thunder, a joint military response to an international crisis that required someone who could coordinate between hostile intelligence agencies while maintaining plausible deniability for all involved governments. The mission was so sensitive that success meant no one could ever know it had happened. I spent 8 months in deep cover, operating under diplomatic immunity while coordinating military assets across 4 continents. When the operation concluded successfully, preventing what intelligence analysts later called the closest we've ever come to World War III, I was promoted directly to colonel, skipping 3 traditional ranks. The promotion came with an unusual requirement: complete operational secrecy. My family, my friends, my entire civilian identity had to remain ignorant of my real military status. The cover story of a failed basic training washout was actually the perfect protection for someone whose real work could never be exposed. While my family planned Marcus's Naval Academy graduation party, I was designing counterintelligence protocols that would become standard across all special operations commands. While they celebrated his first Navy deployment, I was being personally decorated by the President in a ceremony so classified that the Secret Service agents weren't allowed to know who was being honored. The consulting work that my family dismissed as some boring government paperwork was actually strategic planning for joint military operations that involved every branch of the armed forces. Museums and universities would occasionally invite me to speak about military logistics, never knowing they were hosting someone who had redesigned logistics for the most classified operations in American military history. But the position that changed everything came 8 months ago when the Joint Chiefs of Staff offered me a promotion that hadn't been available to anyone my age in 50 years. They weren't just recognizing my service, they were creating an entirely new classification of strategic command. The conversation that finalized my promotion to Brigadier General took place in a room so secure that electronic devices stopped functioning outside the door. At 34, I became the youngest general in Air Force history, responsible for operations so classified that my own security clearance had to be specially created. But I couldn't tell my family any of this. Some achievements require silence, and mine was about to be worth 12 years of carrying their disappointment. The ceremony ended with the traditional reception in the base's main hangar, where families mingled with officers, while a Navy band played patriotic songs that felt like background music to my ongoing humiliation. I stood near the refreshment table, watching Marcus receive congratulations from his new commanding officers, when a commotion near the entrance caught my attention. A group of Air Force personnel had arrived, which was unusual for a Navy promotion ceremony. They moved with the kind of purposeful precision that suggested this wasn't a social visit. Leading the group was Captain Jennifer Hayes, someone I recognized from joint operations briefings, but who had no official reason to be at a Navy base in San Diego. Captain Hayes scanned the crowd methodically, her eyes moving past the celebrating families until they locked onto mine. Her expression shifted from professional scanning to focused recognition, and she began walking directly toward me with the determined stride of someone executing an important mission. My heart rate increased as she approached. Captain Hayes worked in Air Force Strategic Command, specifically in the division that coordinated with my unit on the most classified operations. Her presence here couldn't be coincidental, and her facial expression suggested something significant was happening. "Ms. Victoria Chen?" she asked, using the civilian name that appeared on my official identification, though her tone suggested she knew exactly who I really was. "I need to speak with you privately." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There's been a development. I followed her outside the hangar to a quiet area near the flight line, where the sound of distant aircraft engines provided cover for sensitive conversations. Captain Hayes pulled out a secure phone and showed me a message marked with classification levels that made my stomach clench. "General Morrison has been relieved of command effective immediately," she said quietly. "Congressional investigation, security breach, potential court-martial. The Pentagon needs immediate replacement for Strategic Operations Command, and your name is the only one on the emergency succession list." I stared at the message, trying to process what was happening. General Morrison had been my direct superior for 3 years, the architect of half the classified programs I'd worked on. If he was being removed for security violations, it meant that every operation we'd conducted together was now under federal investigation. "The Joint Chiefs want you in Washington tomorrow morning," Captain Hayes continued. "This isn't a request, it's an emergency activation. You're being promoted to Major General and given operational command of all strategic operations pending congressional review. Major General. At 34, I would be the youngest 2-star general in Air Force history, inheriting command of operations so classified that most Pentagon staff didn't know they existed. It was the kind of promotion that typically required decades of public service and political maneuvering. But crisis had a way of accelerating everything. "The announcement will be made at tomorrow's Pentagon briefing," she said. "Your security clearance is being upgraded to a level that requires immediate relocation and complete operational secrecy. Your civilian identity will remain classified, but your military status will become public record." I looked back toward the hangar where my family was celebrating Marcus's promotion to lieutenant, completely unaware that their failed daughter was about to outrank every officer they'd ever met. The irony was staggering. In less than 24 hours, their military disappointment would be revealed as one of the youngest generals in American history. "What about my cover story?" I asked. Captain Hayes smiled grimly. "The cover story ends tomorrow. Your family is about to learn who you really are." What started as General Morrison's sudden removal began to reveal itself as something far more sinister as I dove deeper into the classified files Captain Hayes provided during our emergency briefing. Morrison's security breach wasn't an isolated incident. It was the visible crack in a conspiracy that threatened to compromise the most sensitive military operations in American history. Over the next 18 hours, as I reviewed classified documents in a secure facility at Vandenberg Air Force Base, I discovered a pattern that made my blood run cold. Morrison hadn't been working alone. He was part of a network of high-ranking military officers who had been systematically selling classified operational intelligence to foreign governments, using their positions of ultimate trust to betray the very missions they were sworn to protect. The scope was staggering. Operation Silent Thunder, the mission that had earned me my colonel promotion, had been compromised from the beginning. Chinese intelligence had known our operational parameters before our teams even deployed. The North African counter-terrorism operations I'd coordinated had been leaked to hostile governments, explaining why so many missions had required last-minute tactical changes. But the pattern went deeper than simple espionage. As I cross-referenced the security breaches with the classified programs I'd worked on, I realized that effective operations were being deliberately sabotaged, while ineffective ones received massive funding. Successful intelligence programs that actually protected American interests were being defunded, while flashy, ineffective projects that generated good publicity and administrative kickbacks were receiving enormous budgets. It was the opposite of everything I'd fought for during 12 years of classified service. While I'd been building real security programs that protected American lives, these traitors had been building elaborate schemes that served foreign intelligence agencies while maintaining the appearance of patriotic service. The files revealed coded communications between compromised officers at different commands, all discussing, quote, strategic partnerships and operational efficiency. What they were really discussing was how to maximize their personal profits from selling classified information while maintaining plausible deniability about their treasonous activities. Pentagon counterintelligence briefed me on the federal investigation that had been quietly underway for 14 months. The FBI had been tracking suspicious communication patterns and unexplained financial flows, but they needed someone on the inside to understand how the military side of the conspiracy operated. someone who understood classified operations intimately but had been kept outside the compromised network. That someone, apparently, was me. Major General Chen, said Agent Patricia Wells, during a classified briefing at the Pentagon's most secure facility. Your operational history makes you uniquely qualified to help us understand this network. You know how legitimate classified programs should function, you have direct experience with the compromised operations, and most importantly, you were deliberately excluded from the conspiracy because your integrity couldn't be compromised. The investigation files painted a picture of systematic treason that reached into some of America's most trusted military institutions. Officers were approving fraudulent intelligence contracts, administrators were creating shell companies to launder foreign payments, and legitimate military personnel were being transferred or silenced when they asked uncomfortable questions about operational security. What made it worse was realizing that while I'd been sacrificing everything to protect American interests in the most dangerous regions of the world, these people had been selling my operational intelligence to the very enemies I was fighting. Missions I'd designed to protect American lives had been betrayed by American officers for personal profit. The irony was bitter. My family saw me as a failure because I'd chosen classified service over public recognition, integrity over career advancement. Meanwhile, the people they would have admired, successful military leaders with impressive public records and prestigious assignments, were traitors who had betrayed the fundamental oath of military service. The secure phone call that destroyed everything came 2 days after my emergency promotion to Major General, while I was still processing the magnitude of the treason I'd uncovered. Agent Wells called with an update that made me physically sick. Major General Chen, we've identified another person of interest in the intelligence network, she said, her voice carefully controlled. Someone with direct connections to both the compromised operations and your personal security clearance. We need you to review some communications immediately. The file she sent contained intercepted phone calls, financial records, and classified intelligence transfers that painted a clear picture of systematic treason. But it was the voice on a recorded conversation that made my hands shake. Marcus Chen, my brother's voice, discussing operational security with known foreign intelligence contacts. My brilliant Naval Academy graduate brother, the family golden child who had just been promoted to lieutenant, had been working as an intelligence liaison for a shell company that existed solely to sell American military secrets to Chinese intelligence. For the past 18 months, while I was being lectured about my lack of military success, Marcus had been earning more money than most admirals made by helping foreign governments target American operations. The recordings were damning. Marcus wasn't some naive officer who didn't understand what he was doing. He was actively helping foreign intelligence services identify classified American programs for targeting. In one conversation with his Chinese handler, he said, "My sister's operational history would be extremely valuable. She has access to programs that even most generals don't know about." But the revelation that shattered me completely came in a recorded conversation between Marcus and our father. The FBI had been monitoring the intelligence network's communications for over a year, and my family's dinner table conversations had inadvertently become evidence in a federal espionage investigation. "Dad, you need to keep Victoria from getting promoted too quickly." Marcus's voice was clear on the recording. "Her security clearance is making it harder for me to access the kinds of operational intelligence my contacts are willing to pay for. If she starts asking questions about information security, it could expose my business arrangements." My father's response was like poison in my bloodstream. "Don't worry, son. Your mother and I will make sure she knows she's not cut out for real military leadership. The last thing we need is Victoria getting ideas about advancing her career when it could interfere with your opportunities." Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus's promotion ceremony hadn't been a celebration of his achievement. It had been a strategic operation to publicly humiliate me while protecting his espionage activities. My family's constant undermining of my military service, their insistence that I was a washout, their refusal to acknowledge my actual capabilities. It was all designed to keep me from pursuing positions that might threaten Marcus's treasonous enterprise. They hadn't just rejected me emotionally, they had actively worked to damage my military reputation to protect their complicity in selling classified American intelligence to foreign governments. Every family gathering where they'd lectured me about my military failures had been a strategic operation to maintain their espionage conspiracy. The worst part was realizing that my mother's proud social media posts about Marcus's Naval Academy achievements were celebrations of treason. Every time she bragged about her successful son to her military wives' club friends, she was bragging about someone who was betraying American soldiers in active combat zones. I sat in my Pentagon office that night staring at transcripts that proved my brother was a traitor and my parents were his accomplices, and realized that the family that had spent years calling me a military failure had been projecting their own treasonous betrayal onto me. I flew to San Diego on a classified military transport, carrying a folder full of evidence that would destroy Marcus's life and expose our parents as accomplices to espionage. The base housing where he lived with his new wife looked different now. Not like a young officer's first assignment, but like a safe house for treason, funded by payments from foreign intelligence services. Marcus answered the door in his navy dress whites, preparing for another ceremony where he'd be celebrated for achievements built on betraying his own country. His face lit up with the kind of condescending brotherly affection he'd perfected over the years. "Victoria, what brings you to San Diego? Mom said you finally got some kind of promotion in your government job. Can we talk privately?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. His living room was a showcase of Naval Academy memorabilia and expensive electronics that no lieutenant could afford on military salary. Every piece had been purchased with Chinese intelligence money, and he displayed it with the pride of someone who thought he'd earned it through legitimate service. "I know about your intelligence work for foreign governments," I said without preamble, placing the folder on his coffee table. "I know about the classified information sales, the shell companies, and your role in compromising American operations that got soldiers killed." Marcus's smile didn't waver, but something calculating flickered behind his eyes. He picked up the folder, flipped through a few pages of transcripts and financial records, then set it down with the casual indifference of someone who'd been expecting this conversation. "Oh, Victoria," he said, settling into his leather recliner like he was about to explain elementary concepts to a child. "You always were too idealistic about how military intelligence actually works. You think national security is about protecting American soldiers, but that's not how real policy gets made." "Real policy?" I stared at him, incredulous. "You sold operational intelligence that got American service members killed in active combat zones." "I facilitated strategic information sharing that prevented larger conflicts," he corrected, his tone maddeningly calm. "Do you know how many wars get avoided when intelligence agencies maintain productive relationships? How many lives are saved when hostile governments understand each other's capabilities? Productive relationships?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay controlled. "You gave Chinese intelligence the operational parameters for missions I designed to protect American lives." Marcus stood up and walked to his window, gazing out at the base where American sailors trained to defend their country. "You spent 12 years in classified programs saving a few dozen soldiers here and there and feeling like a hero. Meanwhile, people like me work at the strategic level, creating frameworks that prevent conflicts before they start. By betraying American operations, by managing information flow between superpowers. The intelligence fees I received allowed me to continue building networks and relationships that create real stability. Your little classified missions are tactical theater. My work is actual strategic diplomacy." I stood up, my hands shaking with anger. "Those soldiers you're so casually dismissing? They're real people, with real families. Every piece of intelligence you sold was used to target American military personnel. And every piece of information I shared was part of preventing larger conflicts that would have killed thousands more," he shot back. "You're upset because you can't see the bigger strategic picture." "The bigger picture," I said quietly, "is that you're a traitor who sold out your own country for money. And worse, you convinced our parents to sabotage my career to protect your espionage operations." For the first time, his composed facade cracked slightly. "They were protecting national interests that go beyond your narrow operational perspective." I picked up the folder and headed for the door. "Enjoy your strategic perspective, Marcus. Military intelligence will be here in 2 hours." That night, I sat in my Pentagon office surrounded by evidence that could destroy my family, and wondering if I had the strength to testify against my own brother in a military treason trial. Agent Wells had made it clear. My cooperation was essential to the espionage case. but prosecuting Marcus would mean becoming the key witness in proceedings that would send him to military prison for life and expose our parents as accomplices to selling classified intelligence. The easy path was mapped out in front of me like a clear flight plan. I could focus on my new role as Major General, quietly transfer Marcus to a different command, and let the investigation target other conspirators while protecting my family from prosecution. Military intelligence had even suggested this approach during a classified briefing. Major General Chen, your brother's involvement is peripheral to the main espionage network, Deputy Director Sarah Martinez had explained. We have enough evidence to prosecute the primary conspirators without your family testimony. You could simply focus on rebuilding Strategic Operations Command and let this situation resolve itself quietly. But sitting in that office, staring at intercepts showing Marcus selling intelligence about missions I'd designed, while I looked at photos from Syria of soldiers whose lives depended on operational security, I realized that silence was its own form of treason. Every piece of classified information Marcus had sold represented real danger for real service members. The $75,000 he'd earned in just 1 month was payment for intelligence that Chinese operatives used to target American military positions. The luxury watch on his wrist, casually displayed like a trophy, was purchased with money paid specifically for information that got 3 Marines killed in an ambush. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Saw the Pentagon announcement about your promotion. Finally, something to be proud of. Marcus says you might be able to help with his next assignment. He's hoping for intelligence work. The casual pride in that message, coming just hours after I'd discovered their systematic conspiracy to betray American military operations, crystallized everything. They weren't just complicit in espionage. They were actively planning to exploit my new position to expand their treasonous activities. I thought about the military oath I'd taken 12 years earlier, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Marcus wasn't some foreign agent threatening American interests. He was a domestic enemy who had weaponized his military position to sell classified intelligence to hostile governments. I thought about the soldiers I'd served with in classified operations, who risked their lives every day trusting that their operational security was protected by fellow Americans. I thought about the intelligence analysts who worked 18-hour days to safeguard information that kept service members alive. I thought about the families who would never know that their loved ones died because someone they trusted had sold their locations to enemy forces. How could I look at their sacrifice and choose family loyalty over national security? The choice became clear with brutal simplicity. I could either be the person who protected traitors because they shared my DNA, or I could be the person who protected soldiers because they shared my oath of service. At 11:23 p.m., I called Agent Wells. I'll testify, I said. I'll provide everything I know about Marcus's intelligence sales, my parents' conspiracy to protect his operations, and any other evidence that might help your case. Are you certain, Major General? This will permanently alter your family relationships. My family relationships were built on treason anyway, I replied. At least this way, some soldiers might actually come home alive. After a long pause, Wells said, We'll begin with your formal deposition tomorrow morning. Thank you for choosing your oath over your blood. I hung up and felt something I hadn't experienced since taking command. The peace that comes from choosing duty over comfort, even when the cost is everything you thought you wanted to protect. For 10 weeks, I lived a triple life that made my deepest classified operations seem straightforward by comparison. At least in combat zones, I knew who the enemy was. Now I was attending family dinners as the newly promoted Major General, while wearing recording devices that captured my loved ones discussing their ongoing espionage activities with foreign intelligence services. Military intelligence had equipped me with surveillance technology so advanced it was undetectable, even under the sophisticated counter-surveillance measures Marcus had learned from his Chinese handlers. Every family gathering became a counterintelligence mission, every casual conversation a potential piece of evidence that could prevent future attacks on American forces. The psychological strain was devastating. I'd sit at my childhood dining room table, listening to my parents congratulate me on my promotion, while federal agents monitored their admissions about years of sabotaging my career to protect Marcus's treasonous activities. I'd embrace my brother while mentally cataloging his detailed explanations of how he identified classified programs for foreign targeting. Agent Wells coached me carefully on intelligence extraction without arousing suspicion. Express interest in his work methodology, she instructed during our weekly debriefings. Let your parents reminisce about family strategy, encourage Marcus to share operational insights, but don't probe too aggressively or his Chinese training will make him suspicious. The most damaging evidence came during a family barbecue 6 weeks into the operation. Marcus had been drinking, and our parents were relaxed in the familiar environment of their backyard. The conversation naturally drifted to my rapid promotion, and my father made a comment that would later become central to the prosecution's treason case. I have to admit, I was terrified when Victoria started getting recognition for her classified work, he said, flipping steaks on the grill. Thank God we managed to convince her she wasn't cut out for military leadership before she could access the kind of intelligence Marcus's contacts are willing to pay for. My mother laughed, refilling her wine glass. Remember when we had to tell her she was a military failure? Poor thing was so devastated, but we couldn't let her advance to positions that might threaten Marcus's business relationships. Marcus raised his beer in a mock toast. To family loyalty, he said with a satisfied smirk. Sometimes you have to sacrifice one child's confidence to protect another child's income stream. I smiled and clinked glasses with my brother while my hidden recorder captured his confession to years of systematic treason protected by psychological warfare against me. The intelligence analysts monitoring in real time later told me it was the clearest admission of family conspiracy they'd ever documented. But the operation's most valuable evidence came during a private conversation with Marcus in our parents' basement. He'd been drinking heavily and seemed to mistake my newfound interest in his work for admiration rather than investigation. You know, Victoria, I always felt bad about destroying your military confidence, he said, leaning against the pool table that his Chinese payments had purchased. But you're too patriotic for intelligence work. You would have reported our information sharing arrangements to counterintelligence within days. What kind of arrangements? I asked, my heart pounding as I tried to sound casually curious. The beauty of my Chinese relationship is that we're preventing conflicts by sharing strategic insights, he continued, apparently convinced that his espionage was sophisticated diplomacy. They pay me to identify American operational weaknesses, I provide intelligence about classified programs, and both sides avoid misunderstandings that could lead to war. It's not treason. It's conflict prevention through strategic transparency. I nodded encouragingly while my recording device captured his detailed explanation of targeting methods, payment structures, and the systematic betrayal of American military operations. The hardest moment came when he hugged me goodbye that night, whispering, "I'm so proud you finally got the recognition you deserve. Maybe now you understand why success sometimes requires moral flexibility." I drove home with Marcus's espionage manual on tape, and the crushing knowledge that my family's love had always been conditional on my ignorance of their crimes against America. The arrests began at 05:00 hours on a Monday morning in January, 8 months after Marcus's promotion ceremony, where I'd been called the family failure. I was in my Pentagon office, reviewing intelligence reports on Chinese military capabilities, when Agent Wells called to tell me the nightmare was over. "We executed warrants at 19 locations this morning," she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of justice finally served. "Your brother was arrested at Naval Base San Diego at 05:12 hours. Your parents were taken into custody at 05:34 hours. The evidence you provided was instrumental in securing these espionage indictments." 37 people were charged in what military prosecutors called the largest intelligence espionage conspiracy in U.S. military history. Marcus faced 26 counts of espionage, treason, and conspiracy to provide aid to foreign enemies. My parents were charged as accessories to espionage and conspiracy to obstruct military justice. The Chinese intelligence network Marcus had served was completely dismantled, with assets frozen across 4 countries. The court-martial lasted 14 months and became a classified proceeding that exposed decades of systematic intelligence betrayal hidden within America's most trusted military institutions. Marcus's defense team tried to portray him as a misguided patriot who believed he was preventing conflicts, but my recorded conversations destroyed that narrative completely. When military prosecutors played the recording of Marcus explaining his, quote, conflict prevention through strategic transparency to a panel of senior military officers, several panel members visibly recoiled. His casual description of selling classified intelligence while sitting in a room purchased with Chinese espionage payments was devastating to any claim of patriotic motivation. My testimony was the prosecution's foundation. For 6 days, I detailed how the espionage network had operated, how my family had systematically undermined my military career to protect their treasonous activities, and how legitimate American operations had been compromised, resulting in the deaths of service members whose identities remained classified. Marcus's military defense counsel tried to discredit me during cross-examination, suggesting that my cooperation with federal investigators was motivated by jealousy of my brother's conventional military success. "Isn't it true, Major General Chen, that you resented your brother's public recognition?" he asked. "I resented my brother's treason," I replied. "Recognition built on selling American soldiers' lives to foreign enemies isn't success. It's evidence of moral depravity that violates every principle of military service." The military panel deliberated for less than 3 hours. Marcus was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment at the United States Disciplinary Barracks. My parents received 15 years each for conspiracy and accessory charges. The court ordered complete asset forfeiture and $23.4 million in restitution to be paid to national security programs, effectively erasing every benefit they'd gained from their espionage activities. But the convictions were only the beginning of institutional change. The Pentagon used the trial revelations to completely overhaul intelligence security protocols, implementing oversight measures I'd helped design with counterintelligence specialists. The Navy established new vetting procedures for officers with family connections to sensitive programs. All military branches created ethics committees with authority to investigate suspicious financial activities. Most importantly, the intelligence Marcus had sold was declassified and shared with allies, allowing American and coalition forces to adjust their operational security accordingly. Lives that would have been lost due to compromised intelligence were saved because the betrayal had been exposed. Most mutrebaz cannabis costs. Yet justice came with its own devastating costs. My extended family disowned me completely, viewing my cooperation with federal investigators as an unforgivable betrayal of blood loyalty. Military colleagues were divided. Some viewed me as a patriotic hero, others as someone who couldn't be trusted because I'd turned against my own family. The media attention was relentless and often hostile. Some commentators painted me as an ambitious officer who destroyed her family for career advancement, while others lionized me as a whistleblower in ways that felt equally inaccurate. 5 years after the trials ended, I stood on the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, watching Lieutenant Sarah Martinez complete her first solo landing as part of the Navy's newest pilot training program. Sarah wasn't just any pilot, she was the daughter of a fallen Marine, whose death had been directly caused by intelligence Marcus sold to Chinese operatives. The scholarship program that had funded her Naval Academy education existed because justice had been served, and recovered espionage assets had been redirected toward honoring the service members my family had betrayed. This wasn't just any training exercise. As the newly appointed Secretary of Defense, the first woman and youngest person ever to hold the position, I was conducting my quarterly inspection of joint military training programs that had been redesigned from the ground up after the espionage scandal. The Chen Defense Protocols, named ironically after the family that had nearly compromised them, had become the Pentagon's flagship demonstration of how military institutions could rebuild trust after systematic betrayal. The transformation had been extraordinary. Where once there had been vulnerable intelligence networks and compromised operational security, we'd built comprehensive protection systems that made espionage nearly impossible. The $23.4 million in recovered assets had been supplemented by congressional appropriations from lawmakers determined to demonstrate America's commitment to protecting service members. Together, these resources had created revolutionary security infrastructure across all military branches, serving over 2.3 million active duty personnel with enhanced protection protocols. But the real change wasn't measured in dollars or security upgrades. It was measured in trust rebuilt, in service members who once again believed that their classified information would be protected by fellow Americans rather than sold to foreign enemies. Sarah completed her landing sequence and climbed out of her F/A-18 Super Hornet, with a smile that contained more validation than any medal I'd ever received. Through her communications headset, she said, "Ma'am, my father always told me that people in the military would fight to protect each other. After what happened to him, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. But seeing what you did, choosing your oath over your family, that's what convinced me to serve." I walked across the flight deck to meet her, looking into eyes that sparkled with the kind of trust that had to be earned through sacrifice. "Sarah," I said, "your father's death wasn't meaningless if it led to changes that protect other service members. You're living proof that his sacrifice created something stronger than what we lost." She nodded, then brightened with the confidence of someone who knew her service mattered. "When I have my own command someday, I want to make sure no other families go through what mine did. I want to help build the kind of military where loyalty means protecting each other, not selling each other out." As I watched Sarah return to her squadron briefing, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The family that had once called me a military failure was now serving the final years of their prison sentences. Marcus had been denied parole 3 times for refusing to acknowledge the full scope of his espionage activities. My parents had lost everything they'd accumulated through decades of complicity and treason. But I had found something they never understood: the difference between success and service, between recognition and responsibility, between being celebrated and being transformational. My position as Secretary of Defense had evolved far beyond what anyone had initially envisioned. As the youngest cabinet member in American history, I'd led a complete overhaul of how the U.S. military approached intelligence security, international cooperation, and service member protection. The Chen Doctrine, a comprehensive approach to military ethics I'd developed based on painful personal lessons, had been adopted by NATO allies and democratic militaries worldwide. The doctrine wasn't just about preventing espionage, it was about ensuring that military service actually served the people it claimed to protect. Every program required transparent oversight, measurable outcomes for national security, and absolute accountability for the protection of service members' lives. Military careers were evaluated not on personal advancement, but on demonstrated commitment to the welfare of fellow service members. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family's betrayal had ultimately made me more effective at the work I'd always been called to do. My experience with systematic deception had given me insights into how to prevent institutional corruption. My military background had taught me how to build systems that could function under the most extreme pressure. My personal sacrifice had given me credibility with service members who understood that real leadership required choosing principle over comfort. America's military reputation had not only recovered from the espionage scandals, it had been enhanced by our response to them. We'd become the global standard for ethical military service, and allied nations sent delegations to study our accountability methods and protection protocols. But the most meaningful validation came from the families we served. Last month, I'd received a letter from the widow of a soldier whose life had been saved because we'd identified and closed the intelligence vulnerabilities that Marcus had created. Before the reforms, when my husband deployed, I worried that someone might betray his mission for money, she'd written. Now I know that people like you understand that protecting our service members is more important than protecting our relatives. The personal costs of my choices had been severe and permanent. My relationship with my extended family never recovered. Cousins who had grown up attending my change of command ceremonies now treated me like a traitor who had violated sacred bonds of family loyalty for personal advancement. Former family friends viewed me as someone who couldn't be trusted because I'd chosen institutional duty over blood relationships. But I'd found a new kind of family among service members who shared my values, intelligence professionals who understood the cost of moral courage, and military families around the world who believed that protecting each other was more sacred than protecting criminals. 8 months ago, I'd received an unexpected letter from Marcus in military prison. He was serving his 12th year of a life sentence and had requested a meeting through his attorney. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," he'd written, "but I've spent a decade thinking about what I did to those soldiers. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I finally understand why you made the choices you did." I hadn't responded yet. Perhaps I would, perhaps I wouldn't. Forgiveness was something I was still learning to navigate. And I'd discovered that healing didn't require reconciliation with people who had chosen espionage over their oath of service. Standing on that carrier deck, watching young pilots train with equipment and protocols that existed because justice had been served, and recovered assets had been redirected toward protecting service members, I realized that some stories don't end with family reunions or Hollywood reconciliations. Sometimes they end with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that your choices created more security than vulnerability, that your sacrifices served something larger than your own comfort. Sarah completed her training rotation and walked over to me one more time. "Madam Secretary," she said in the precise military bearing that honored her father's memory, "thank you for making sure the military is worth serving again." I smiled, thinking of all the people who had called me a failure for choosing classified service over public recognition. "Thank you for proving that service members deserve leaders who protect them instead of selling them," I replied. "Some victories are measured in promotion ceremonies and family photographs. Others are measured in young pilots who can serve their country because someone chose justice over comfort, duty over loyalty, and the future over the past." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.